Welcome to week 3 of the Twitch Chess Ladder Recap. Today we'll go over 6 games. We'll start with Fianchetto and Hakov. So d4, c6, e4, transposing to a Caro-Kann, d5, take, c4, so this is a Panov-Botvinnik attack, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, knight f3, bishop g4. Okay. So this is all theory so far. And the theory would continue c takes d5, knight takes d5, queen b3 with a double attack, bishop takes a3, g takes f3, and now black has 2 moves here. One is to play e6 and go into this very famous endgame. After queen takes d7, knight takes d4, bishop at b5 check.
Check.
Knight takes b5, and then the cute queen c6 check. So you don't take this right away. Of course, you can't block now because the rook would hang, so king e7 is forced. And queen takes b5. So this is one way to kind of play it. The other way to play it would be, instead of e6, to play knight to b6 and keep the queens on. Bishop e3, e6, castle, bishop e7, d5, take, queen c7, king b1. So in both lines, white kind of has a slight edge, but black is kind of willing to play these positions because of these pawns, although white does have a lead in development and 2 bishops. So it's very, very imbalanced. But in any case, that's kind of the way it's supposed to go. Bishop e3 just lets black equalize almost instantaneously with e6, because now black has no problems. Black's shored up his pawn structure, his bishop is outside the pawn chain, it's, black's pieces are developed normally. So already black's probably equal. So in this position, probably white should do something like c5, and just do like a typical Panov idea of grabbing space on the queen side. Then after bishop b7, just go like something like h3. And the reason why you play c5 is that so you don't allow this move, because the problem is after e6, say bishop e2, which happened in the game, now d6 c4 is actually kind of annoying, because now you have to play bishop takes c4 and waste like half a tempo, and this isolated queen pawn position is probably not that great for white. Because usually in these IQPs in the Panov-Botvinnik, black has some sort of deficiency. Either this bishop is still stuck on c8, or something where white's pieces are kind of more active, but here it's just, white doesn't have much piece activity for the fact that he gets this isolated queen pawn. So white should probably play c5 and avoid that. But here he kind of has to bite the bullet and, okay, just take on c4 and lose half a tempo. He decides he wants to try to take this with the queen and play queen a4. But the problem is, when you end up taking this pawn on c4 with your queen is actually a bit misplaced because it's on this open c-file, and this rook's coming to c8 anyway, in most variations. So white's actually spending 2 moves to do something where he's actually ending up misplacing his queen. So he should just take on c4 with the bishop, and it's probably just around equal. So bishop d6, queen takes c4. So he wasted 2 moves to do this, and his queen isn't really that great on c4. Castle, rook c8, queen b3. And now black should probably defend this pawn with his knight a5, gain a tempo, queen moves somewhere, say queen d1, and now knight c4. And this is probably already slightly better for black. We're hitting this pawn on b2, and if he moves this pawn on b2, then this knight on c3 becomes undefended. So already white's under some pressure. Maybe white has to go back to bishop c1 or something. It's kind of awkward. Instead he played queen d7, which is also okay. I think knight a5 is a little more accurate because it comes with the gain of tempo. So rook fd1, now knight a5, queen b5, queen c7, so he declines the queen trade. And now white can play like rook c1. It's always a good idea to put rooks opposite queens on open files. It also gets that rook doing something. But he played h3 instead. And now black plays a good move, a6, putting this question to the queen before deciding what to do with this bishop. So the queen goes to g5, and now bishop takes f3. Okay, so now white actually has a choice, believe it or not. It seems like g takes f3 is just out of the question. It ruins your pawn structure. But it actually has some merit. And the reasoning behind it is, okay, when you play g takes f3, you're opening this g file, which you could actually develop some play on with king h1 and rook to g1. Because if you notice, black's kind of playing on the queen side. This knight's kind of hopping to c4, creating weaknesses. So white, for his part, is probably going to want to try to play on the king side. And now, by opening this g file, you force black at some point to maybe go g6 and weaken his king side. And the other reasoning behind playing g takes f3 is that, okay, you control e4 square with your pawn, but also you leave this bishop on e2, so that on knight c4 you're planning on taking on c4. And then playing d5 or something. And, okay, black's probably only slightly better, just because of the pawn structure, but after king g2, you can actually defend all these pawns pretty easily. So, I mean, bishop takes f3 wasn't bad, it's just g takes f3 actually merits a lot of consideration. They're probably about equal. Because, I mean, for all the positives that I mentioned for g takes f3, you do kind of ruin your pawn structure, but I bet white didn't even consider it. And it definitely is probably no worse than bishop takes f3. Okay, so he played bishop takes f3, and now the problem is black can play knight c4 here, which is what happened. And after knight c4, the best move is probably just to play bishop c1, actually, with the idea that after, say, b5, b3, knight b6, knight e4. And, okay, black is, again, probably slightly better, because this isolated queen pawn is not really doing white any favors. This bishop is poorly placed. He already created a weakness on the queen side. Black has control of the c-file. But, he's not down any material, and if he can somehow get his pieces out in the next couple of moves, he should be doing okay. Problem is, black has this square under firm control, so it's hard for white to get rid of this pawn, but white just kind of blundered here and played rook ac1. And now, do you guys see why this move was a blunder? Do you guys see why this move was a blunder? It's actually very subtle, believe it or not. It's very subtle. So the point why this is a blunder is because this rook and this queen end up on the same diagonal. And so you might think, okay, what's the big deal? Well, it turns out that there's actually a secondary threat in this position, and it's that this queen is very close to being trapped, believe it or not. So it seems like this queen has tons of mobility. It can, it seems like it has this whole scope. But if you actually look, it can't go 1080 squares. It can't go here because of this queen, can't go here because of the pawn, can't go here because of the bishop, can't go here because of the pawn, can't go here because of the bishop, can't go here because of the pawn, can't go here because of the bishop, can't go here, can't go here because of the knight, can't go back because of the knight, can't go back because of the bishop. So all of a sudden, it's left with one square. So after h6, queen h4 is the only move, and now knight takes e3. The problem is after f takes e3, bishop g3, and all of a sudden, queen is actually trapped. Again, can't go any of these squares. Knight and the bishop do a great job of harassing it. So, after knight takes e3, you'd have to go queen takes e3, but now problem 2 arises. And problem 2 is that this queen and this rook are on the same diagonal. So bishop h2 check. It's kind of useful to throw in this check. King h1, I guess, and then bishop f4 wins material. So black probably should have started with h6, by the way. And then after queen h4, knight takes e3, he can't take back, again, because of bishop g3 winning the queen, so he'd have to go something like, I don't know, rook e1, and just be down a piece. So the way he did it in the game is that he actually took on e3 first, and allowed white to take on e3 with his queen. And this way he's only losing the exchange after bishop f4. When he should be losing a piece, again, like I said, after rook c1, h6, queen h4, knight takes e3 just wins a piece. Because again, you can't take bishop g3 wins the queen. So okay, so what happened? Right, so he played knight takes e3. Okay, and then white tried to kind of complicate things with knight to d5, which doesn't really help. Queen takes c1 was accurate. Knight takes f6
check.
King h8 forced. And now, I mean, white could have tried knight h5, threatening mate. Rook g8 is kind of forced. Oops. Rook g8 is kind of forced. Queen takes e3. Queen takes b2. And if you count the material, black has 6 pawns. White has 5, and white is down the exchange. So black, of course, is clearly winning, but this is probably better than what happened in the game, which was that he took on e3. And now, actually, black can win a whole bunch of material here with the Zug h6. Idea of h6 is that, okay, if you take on c1, I'll take with check first,
check.
Then take your queen. And your queen has to go someplace because I'm attacking it. And the point is, your queen has to let go of this e3 square. So say you go, it doesn't really matter, queen a5, queen h4 is the same thing. Say queen a5. So I'm just going to take on e3.
Check.
And then I can just take on f6. And even if you go to h4, it's the same thing. Queen h4, I take check.
Check.
You do something, king h1, whatever. And I can still take on f6 because this is defended. I can just play queen g5 or queen f4, and I'm just up a full rook now. So h6 would have been most accurate. It doesn't really matter though. Queen takes b2 is good enough, and black went on to win pretty easily. So white kind of made a couple of inaccuracies in the opening, and they kind of snowballed into losing material after rook c1, which was a natural enough looking move. But because of his earlier misplays, he had to make a move like bishop c1, which was kind of unnatural. So that was that game. Okay. So next game we're going to look at is Marius against Tylik. Okay. So this one was also an opening inaccuracy, but much earlier in the game. c4, g6. This is King's Indian. If you guys remember from an earlier video, I showed you guys that bishop g7 was the correct way to play, and then e4, d6, knight f3, castle, bishop e2, e5. This is kind of the main line. So we get this move e5 in. Black in this game played e6. So this is already a mistake, because in the King's Indian, we need to fight for dark squares. That's really what we're doing. So by playing e6, we're not fighting for the dark squares. And if you notice, as I go through the rest of the game, so here he should probably still play e5 anyway and just be down a tempo. But instead he played knight to d7. So it seems like, okay, everything's kind of alright. But the problem is actually that this move is very strong. e5. Because if you take on e5, and move your knight, doesn't really matter where you move it, say g4. But e8's the same thing. I play bishop g5. And now you have a problem. Because if you move your queen, knight b5 actually just wins the game instantly. Because you can't stop knight takes c7, which actually traps your queen. But it also forks a rook and a queen, so you can't even stop that. You're losing a bunch of material here. And if you block, which is what you have to do, well, I'm just going to take and play queen d2. And the problem is this pawn is very weak. And your pieces are not very well coordinated at all. So this is already an opening disaster. So e5 was a very accurate move. Okay, and if you don't take and play knight e8, like what happened in the game, it's pretty much the same thing. Bishop g5, f6, ef6, knight df6. Okay, well now this pawn isn't isolated, but still, black has kind of problems developing. This bishop is stuck. Whoops. Sorry. This bishop is stuck behind this pawn. And white has this open file to attack this pawn. So white's already doing quite well here. And this was only because of that one opening mistake, e6. Okay, so rook e1. c6. And now probably the most accurate move for white here is to play bishop d3, with the idea of playing queen to d2, rook a to d1, and just getting all his pieces out. Notice how black can't ever really play e5. Where's this bishop going? Where's this queen going? Where's this knight going? Where's this knight going? All of his pieces are just balled up, and white just can add pressure at his leisure. But instead, Marius tries to kind of trade pieces, which helps black actually. So he plays knight e4, which is kind of forcing. I mean, this knight's well defended. It's defended 4 times. You're not going to win that piece. And since white has more space, trading actually helps black here. So queen b6, bishop takes, knight takes, and knight takes. And now black's actually doing better than he was before. Still not great, but trading those 2 sets of pieces kind of helped him. Okay, so white played queen d3 here. And of course, black can't take on b2 because rook to b1, and this queen is trapped again. Themes of queens being trapped. But now actually, black has a good reply here, which is to play e5. So the point, of course, is that I'm threatening to play e4 right away. And if you take on e5, the problem is all of a sudden I'm exposing an attack on f2. So like after bishop f5, for example, this is probably close to equal because knight e4 is coming, this knight's a bit misplaced, my rook's coming to d8. Queen takes b2 is also possible because I'm hitting e5. This is actually probably fine. So relatively best for white would be to play like c5 here, and then e4, queen c4 check.
Check.
So my queen's attacked, I have to attack your queen. Take,
check.
Take, king g7, knight g5, and now we just trade a bunch of pawns with rook d8. Take. And even though black's down a pawn here, this is probably closer to a draw. Because actually black's rooks are more active than white's rooks. And black's king is more active. So... and white has to find a lot of accurate moves just to even get to that point. So e5 would have been a good try here. King g7, I'm not really sure what the point of this move was. He needs to try to get this bishop out. So bishop d1. Probably queen a3 is better just to defend this and attack d6. Then after queen c7, bishop d3, b6, knight g5 to hit this. Rook e8 and rook a d1. And again, black's pieces are kind of tied down. This bishop is tied down to this pawn. You don't really want to play h6 because it weakens this. And again, white can, choose to double on this file if he wants. Could maybe go d5 if he wants. And again, white's just more pleasant. More pleasant, as Kramnik would say. Okay, so bishop d1 was instead played, bishop d7, bishop c2, so he kind of reroutes. Now he has ideas to play knight g5 and knight takes h7, by the way. Potentially. Rook a e8. And here, rook d1 is probably most accurate. He had some ideas of trying to mate him, but it doesn't quite work. This knight is a good defender. But just kind of centralizing his rooks makes the most sense. Queen a5, h3, just, solid. Again, you can't really take either of these pawns because the queen actually gets trapped. So for example, if queen takes b2, here, oops. Here, and the queen is trapped again. But okay, so he played knight g5. And here, black could just play e5 here with equality. Because after take, h3, queen d4, this is pretty much equal. Again, there's pressure on f2 if this knight ever moves. And this bishop is coming to f5. So this is about equal. But again, black needs to get this bishop out into the game. Instead, he played rook e7. And again, rook a d1 is probably good. Rook e3. So now he's just trying to pile up on this pawn, which makes sense. And black just blunders here. Black actually could have equalized again with now not e5, but c5. So I'm threatening to take this pawn, so you pretty much have to push. And then I just push. And now I've blocked up the center. This bishop is now free to go to f5. And white really has no more play. Again, these knight takes h7 things don't quite work because I can take with the knight, and then queen takes g6,
Check.
I can play king h8, and my rook defends along that rank. So queen takes h7 is not mate. And also my bishop is defending h3, so there's no rook h3. So that would have just been good for black, but bishop e8 just kind of hangs the game. Knight takes e6
Check.
fork. Relatively best is to take. King f7 makes things even worse. Knight g5
Check.
just wins a full rook now.
Check.
And now the cute move that works is actually knight takes h7, and this actually just mates. If king takes, queen takes g6 check. This bishop is pinned, so I have to go king here. And now check. Forced.
Check.
Forced.
Check.
Forced.
Checkmate.
Alright. So white kind of got a good advantage out of the opening, but black actually had a couple of chances to equalize due to a couple misplays from white, but never was able to kind of get to full equality. It's hard to play chess when you know, start on move 8 with a bad position. So black was slowly weaseling his way out, but then never quite managed to gain full equality. Alright, so now we're going to look at a pretty quick game between Chessic Student and Saka Bigfoot. Okay, so this is a pretty short game. So we got London system. Okay. So let's actually transpose back into a kind of more normal opening, even though the first few moves were kind of odd. So knight f3 is kind of just like the most normal move here. Queen b3 is actually a mistake, believe it or not. And the reason is that, okay, so you're threatening to take on b7, of course, but black has bishop to b4. And now after a3, bishop takes c3.
Check.
You actually probably should take this with the pawn. And then after knight a5, defending this, queen b4, knight takes c4, bishop takes c4, d takes c4, queen takes c4 is just equal. Opposite color bishops, you know, nothing really too much going on. You know, black is just going to play c6 next or something. But you can't actually take with the queen, which it looks like you should be able to, because knight e4 is very strong. The point is, okay, the queen moves somewhere. Don't really want to go to c2 and discover an attack on the queen, so queen b3 makes more sense. And now black has a strong move, e5. The point is that we're trying to open up this d file to get queen d2 mate. So for example, if you take on e5 with the pawn, I'm going to play d takes c4, and now I'm threatening your queen, and I'm threatening mate. So you have to do something about that. And queen d1 really is the only thing you can do. And now after g5, queen takes d8.
Check.
Rook takes d8, bishop g3, take, take, take. This is super good for black. I mean, black's up a pawn. These pieces are all terrible. This is just over. Okay, so probably white shouldn't do that. So instead of d takes e5, probably bishop takes e5 is better. But again, take, take, take. Again, double attack, threatening the queen and mate. So queen d1, and now b5, defending this pawn, and again, black is probably slightly better. So bishop b4 is, or sorry, queen b3 is inaccurate because of bishop b4. Okay, rook b8 is what black played. Looks like an awkward move. You don't really want to play a rook to b8 unless you absolutely have to. Knight f3. Okay, so bishop b4 again is probably indicated for some of the similar reasons that I showed you before. It's not quite as good now because this is defended more, but it still makes sense. He instead played knight to b4, which is actually a mistake. It looks like you're threatening knight to c2. But the problem is, after queen a4 check, for example, you really have nothing better than knight to c6. And you just wasted a move. So if you play c6, well, this is hanging. I can't really take it right away, though, because you can play this. But I can just play rook c1. And now this knight's kind of stuck. This rook needs to move. It's not really looking great for you. I always have queen takes a7 as well, potentially. So probably better is to play queen d7. But after queen takes,
check,
knight takes, and rook d1, this is good for white. This knight's kind of not really well placed. I'm threatening c7. Also knight b5 is coming. And if knight c6, now I can play c5. Bishop e7, knight b5, and I'm just winning this pawn by force. You have to play like a6 and
check,
f8 or something. This just looks good for white. So knight b4 was a mistake. White played rook c1 instead. Whoops. Which is also fine. But black's best move here is actually probably to play knight c6 again, which makes you think knight b4 wasn't so great. He instead played bishop d6, which is just a blunder, because unfortunately he needs his bishop to help defend this knight. And so after bishop takes bishop, you can't take with the pawn because I win your knight. If you take with the queen, I have c5, interfering the line of defense between the queen and knight, so I win a piece. If you play a check, I'll just take it, and then your queen is still hanging. So black had to play knight c2.
check,
And then rook takes c2, bishop takes c2, queen takes c2, and c takes d6. So right now, white only has 2 pieces for a rook, but this is actually really hopeless, believe it or not. So sample variation just to show you. C takes d5, and here black actually resigned. So it might have been a bit premature, but I mean, he's actually not doing well at all. So for example, after knight takes d5, bishop e5 check, king f8, knight takes e5, e takes e5, and castle. This should just be really good for white. This pawn's probably going to fall. And the 2 pieces will kind of rule the day, especially since this rook is going to take a while to get out. It's a little premature, but definitely not unjustified. So he just kind of lost coordination of his pieces with bishop d6. So that was that game. Okay, so now we're going to look at Railbird and Zwish. Okay, this is the 4th game. Okay. So e4, c5. So this is a con. The ace rook opening. Okay, so I'm Roxy bind. Let's c3, queen c7, bishop e2. Okay. So when you play this con, a lot of times this can actually morph into a hedgehog, where you play like b6 and d6 and bishop e7 and bishop b7. And in those positions, when you play the hedgehog, this knight belongs on this square, d7. So a move here is to actually just play b6 with the idea of kind of just getting this hedgehog formation. Another move you could play here is bishop to b4. So for example, castle, take, or sorry, castle is probably fine for black. And you can actually also take this, but this is actually unclear after take, knight takes e4, bishop f3, knight c5, knight b3, d6, bishop f4, threatening take on d6, so e5, but now there's a hole here. Knight takes c5, queen takes c5, bishop e3, queen c7, and queen d5. So this is actually unclear, because white's down a pawn, but this bishop can't move. I'm going to play c5 at some point. Also just going to play rook d1, try to win this pawn back. And I have 2 bishops. So this is unclear, but you could also just castle and move 8 and kind of be safe. But I think these are probably more accurate than what was played, which is knight to c6. Because again, now you're taking away that possibility of kind of building a hedgehog structure. Because again, the knight belongs on d7 in those positions. So flexibility is important in the opening. It's not a serious mistake, but it's probably an inaccuracy. So castle, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop c5, queen d3, and castle. Okay, so I don't think black should have actually traded these knights off, because even though his pieces kind of look active, his dark squares are a little weak. So maybe just like bishop e3, try to trade off these bishops to exploit the dark squares. So for example, after b6, take, rook fd1, bishop e7, white has this move b4. The idea is to deflect the queen from e5. So for example, if queen takes b4, e5, knight e8, rook b1, queen c5, and queen takes d7 is good for white. All of black's pieces are kind of stuck. And so probably better than taking on d4 is to play queen c7, but now queen d6, and white should be better. Kind of infiltrating with the queen, getting ready to double up, getting ready to play e5, etc. So that was probably better than what he played, which is king h1. He's trying to play f4, but he really doesn't want to play f4 in this position because black's idea here is to play some sort of like b5 and d5. Oops. b5 and d5 eventually, and put his bishop on b7 and hit e4. So you usually want to have this pawn on f3 to help support e4. So even after king h1, white could actually play black could actually play b5, with the idea of take, queen b8. So it's a pawn sacrifice, but black gets a lot of play. So now the b5 d5 idea. And the center is kind of opening up, and this bishop is looking a little silly, as is this bishop. These bishops are looking pretty good. So for the next few moves, actually, black had b5 available. So bishop e7 is what he played. f4, d6, rook f3. Okay, now he should really play b5, because now this pawn is no longer able to defend e4, and this rook is actually misplaced on f3. So for example, after take, knight takes b5, queen b8, same idea. Bishop e3, now bishop b7, now you have to go knight c3, rook c8, a4, d5, and again this rook is looking dangerously placed. So this is also good for black. So black always has to be looking to play b5 in these types of positions, because otherwise this bind is actually quite strong. White can kind of just improve his position at will if black doesn't lash out with b5. So he played bishop d7, which is okay. Rook h3. Okay, now he really needs to play b5, because now c takes b5 is actually just a mistake. A takes b5, and now you can't even take, because if after take, I can play knight takes e4. Now this is just really good for black. So if you take, now this pawn's coming to b4, so you probably shouldn't even take. You probably should just go b3. And now bishop c6, bishop f3, take, queen takes, rook c8, and this is just equal. Good pressure on the c-file. So again, b5 would have been called for, bishop e3, bishop c6, bishop e3 instead. And now guess what the best move is here? Yep, you guessed it, b5 again, same idea. Rook a d8. Instead, bishop f3, guess what the best move is here? You guessed it, b5. Okay, he played g6 instead. Rook d1, guess what the best move is here? b5, you guessed it. Okay, he actually played it though. And now it's just roughly equal, believe it or not. So take, queen b7, this is all correct. Knight c3, defending this. Pawn on e4, but queen takes b2. Rook b1, queen a3, only move, but it's fine. Rook b3, queen a8, good move, so you're keeping pressure on this, f5, e5, rook g3. Okay, so this is kind of equal. Sample line is just like rook c8 maybe. Bishop g5, queen a7, bishop e3, queen a8. And you could actually agree to a draw here if you wanted. Okay, king g7 is what he played. It doesn't really make sense to move your king up and expose yourself to these types of ideas. I mean, the king didn't really need to be on g7. It's better to kind of get these rooks doing something. So he did play queen d2, rook e8, bishop h6.
Check.
King h8, fg. So he correctly took with the f pawn. You don't want to take with the h pawn and open up the h file. Queen e2. And now again, black should kind of just reorganize his pieces. So he should play bishop d7 with the idea of going bishop e6, and putting his rooks in the open files. Because, you know, he can't really overpower this pawn. But he can improve the placement of his pieces. And then now he'd be more ready to play a d5 at some point. But instead he played bishop f8, bishop g5, bishop e7, h4, rook g8. And here, white I think blunders in time pressure. Probably should just play queen c4 to threaten queen f7. And then rook f8, queen e2, rook g8, etc. But he played bishop e3. Now this line of communication is cut off. So actually, black can take this, believe it or not. So it actually seems like, okay, well, why can he take this? Because after bishop takes, can't I play bishop b6? And now I'm double attacking this rook. I'm double attacking this rook and this bishop. But actually, black can sacrifice the exchange here, but have these two monster central passed pawns. So the point is, after bishop b6, simply play bishop f5, sacrifice the exchange, but you're going to win this guy. So rook b7, for example, bishop takes h4, rook f3, bishop g3 is a cute move. You can't take because of queen h4 check. And if you play rook h3, I can take here. So just to show you, I can play check. If you go here, I can take. And if you take this, I can take here and win this. I'm just up 3 pawns, 4-1. So, oh, and just one final thing. If you go queen h2, I can't take this right away because you can checkmate me. But what I can do is I can go queen f3 check, forking your rook and your king. So then when you go queen g2, now I'll take, just as a side point. But in any case, the point is after bishop takes h4, rook f3, bishop g3, queen c4, queen h4 check actually to trade queens. And these pawns are really strong, supported by these two bishops. So I can kind of just try to push these pawns. So even though I'm down the exchange, it's 2 pawns for the exchange, and the pawns are really strong. So black's actually better here. But I guess black was afraid of this, potentially, so he didn't take on e4. Played rook b8. And here white should probably just take, play queen c4, attack this, rook c8, and play queen e6, and kind of just get in. And again, it's probably about equal. Black will defend his bishop, and, you know, it's about equal. But instead, after rook b8, he played h5. But now, after rook takes b3, a takes b3, queen a1, fork.
Check.
So knight d1 is forced. Well, now the problem is this pawn is undefended. So bishop takes e4 was good. And here, h takes g6 is probably the best. And then bishop takes queen c4, d5, queen c7, and bishop f8. And again, these pawns are going to start rolling. But instead, after knight to d1, knight bishop takes e4, played king h2. Just trying to unpin himself. Okay, bishop takes f3, rook takes f3, and now he should take this pawn, but with what? He should take it with a pawn. To support a knight g4 and to open up his rook. So after bishop d2, just queen d1, trying to get a queen back into the game. And you're just up 2 pawns. He took with a knight, though, which actually gave white some counterplay. And he should have taken this counterplay with rook f7, threatening the bishop. And queen d2, simply threatening to get in with the queen. So queen a3 to defend the pawn, e4 to cut it off, queen b3 to attack the rook, rook d7 to attack the pawn, queen c4, now you're threatening to go check maybe, and just knight f2. And okay, now maybe I'm going to take this pawn at some point. Black has more problems to worry about than he did before. But again, white was in some severe time pressure, and so played knight f2. And now black made another mistake with rook f8, should just move his knight back to f6, and get knight g4 potentially happening. But he played rook f8. Now after rook takes f8, takes f8. White actually has queen f3. So the dual threat is to take on f8, But if you go bishop g7, now my second threat comes into play where I play queen to c6, forking mate and forking the pawn. So h6 is kind of forced. Give yourself some luft. Queen takes d6 and queen c3. And okay, white's only slightly worse now because he got a pawn out of it. And there's really nothing else that black can do other than bishop g7. If king g8, queen d5 check is just repetition. So that would have been a better try. But he played queen c4 instead. Queen 8 was a good move, defending the back rank and getting the queen active. Knight g4, queen d8, and here white lost on time. Probably he should play queen f7, but even here black has an edge just because he's up 2 pawns. Although it's kind of tricky because he can't really push either pawn very easily yet. Like he can't push d5 yet because this e5 pawn is in danger. And he can't really push e4 because he doesn't want to open up this diagonal. So it'll take him some moves to kind of get his king safe and be able to push these pawns, but the 2 extra pawns should prevail eventually. So that was that one. Okay, 5th game is Oni against Misha. I think Oni got kind of psyched out this game. Everyone's been talking about Big Misha. Okay, so he plays the Alpin, which is what he normally plays. Okay, now he knows better than to play what he did. He should obviously take on d5. This is just the main line. He played e5, which is a mistake because it basically gives black a good French. So knight c6, d4, and bishop f5. And already black is probably already better. Because he basically has a French pawn structure, but no defect. No bad bishop. So bishop b5, e6, knight e2, queen b6, take,
check,
take, castle, knight h6. Okay, so probably black's slightly better. White should probably play knight to d2 and take with the knight, and then try to go with knight f3. And okay, it's probably equalish. But he played bishop g5, which just hangs this pawn. So black can take the pawn. And here, white should probably defend his rook with knight d2. But after c4, black is doing quite well. Notice this bishop controls b1. So this is good for black, but okay, it's not devastating. He instead played queen a4, try to be tricky, which is also okay. Queen b5 was strong, forking the queen and the knight. So queen d1 was kind of forced. Bishop d3 was strong, attacking the knight. Rook e1. Knight f5, trying to get your pieces in. Knight f4, h6. So bishop takes h6. And knight takes d3. So this was good, but c4 is good too. Knight f4, queen b2. Okay, so now he has to defend the rook again with knight to d2. And then queen takes c3. Knight f3, defend this pawn. Rook b8. And okay, black's better, but it's not, you're not dead. But after queen a4, you are dead, because now your knight actually has no place to go. So you are threatening queen takes c6, but as long as I can defend this pawn, you're going to lose at least a piece, because knight a3, there's a double attack, and knight d2 is just hanging now. There's no queen to defend it. So king d7 was accurate, or sorry, rook c8 was fine. Queen a6 attacking the rook, rook c7, okay, just defending everything. And now there's no way to defend this rook without losing the knight. So he played queen a5, attacking the rook again, but now king d7, everything is finally defended. Knight d2, queen takes d2, wins a piece, and now you're also threatening this. He played rook b1 and then lost this as well. So kind of everything went downhill once b2 was hung. Just got to watch out for queens moving forwards in these games. But if he had just played kind of like the normal main line, like he knows, he probably would have gotten a better game. So don't be scared by Big Misha, just play normal chess and you should be fine. Yeah, so if you're playing someone you think is stronger than you, don't try to play some weird moves. Just play what you know best, and if they beat you, then you can learn from it. Okay, so we'll go for the last game finally, which was Marius against Mimstar. Alright, so this is the last one. Okay, so d4, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3. Okay, so the most common moves here are e6, a6, or d takes c4. Bishop f5 is inaccurate, and I'll get to this in a second, or not in a second, on Friday, because there's actually another ladder game that went almost identically to this. And there's a reason why this is incorrect. So the reasoning is, after take, queen b3, it's a double attack on this and on this. And it's actually hard to stop. So for example, if you try to defend both, I can play knight e5. And it's really bad. And you don't really want to play b6. It's too weakening. And any other queen move will undefend one of the pawns. So, queen c8 undefends this. Queen, say, I don't know, d6 undefends this. So this is actually a nasty fork. So relatively best would be to play queen b6. Then after knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, e6, queen b3, play this position and just be down a pawn. But black has slightly more development, so she has some compensation. But yeah, you gotta always be careful on the Slav of moving his bishop out too early and undefending this pawn. If you guys have watched my Slav video on YouTube, you would know that already. You guys would know that already. So queen b3, e6, so she just gave up this pawn. And these moves are all actually pretty good. Bishop f4, bishop e7, e3, castle, bishop c7, queen c8, bishop a6. This is actually a really strong idea from white. Queen takes, bishop takes, rook e8, rook c1, knight b6, castle, knight e4, knight e5. Okay. So white is just up a pawn, and black's pieces are kind of huddled on these squares. Not f7. But okay, what should black play here? Well, the problem is, after knight e5, what is white threatening? Well, white's threatening to take on b6 and play knight d7 and win the exchange because this rook is entombed. So how do we avoid that? Well, we take a piece first. Okay, now we're threatening this, so you have to take back. And now f6. So this move is kind of twofold purpose. One is it evicts the knight, but two is it actually gives our rook a square. So after knight to c6, we can play rook f7. Take.
Check.
Doesn't matter which rook you take with. Bishop c8. And white's better, obviously, because he's up a pawn, but rook c7, rook c1, take, king f8. Okay, it's not completely hopeless yet. Although rook c6, I guess, does win a second pawn. So maybe you have to go like rook. I guess you're losing this pawn anyway. So yeah, it's probably not great. So maybe you have to keep that rook. Maybe go like rook a7. Try to encourage some weaknesses. But in any case, this is better than what happened in the game, which was bishop f6. So the problem with bishop f6 is now white can actually start it like this. Knight takes e4. So there's actually two threats now that bishop f6 was played. Because now I can actually, if I remove this knight, I can play bishop d6 and entomb the rook that way. So knight takes e4 kind of does a dual threat. And so after bishop takes e4, bishop takes b6. Okay, if you take on e5, if you take on b6, I'll play knight d7. Same idea. But if you take on e5, I'll play bishop c5, and same idea. I'm attacking your bishop, and I'm attacking your rook. So you have to move your bishop, and then I win your rook. So this just wins the exchange. He took on b6 instead, and gave her the opportunity to save the exchange by taking on e5. And now take on e4, take on b6, take on e5, take on e4, rook c7. Okay, I mean white's much better here, because the rook on the 7th, they're going to have control of the open file. This pawn's probably going to fall. But at least you're not losing the exchange, which is what happens after a takes b6. So she had to remove this to stop knight d7. But she took this instead, and now knight d7 just wins the exchange, and with it the game. Rook e7, knight takes f8. If rook takes b7, by the way, trying to trap the knight. The problem is knight takes e4, and then no matter what you take with either pawn or bishop, say bishop, I can play rook c8, and my knight gets out, because I'm going to have a check. So that's why that didn't work. So she took on f8, but now knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, rook c8 check, e8, and rook fc1, and now white's just up the exchange and is going to promote an a pawn. So it went on for another 20 moves or so, but black ended up losing. So it was really only one major mistake. That bishop f5 in the opening kind of caused everything to collapse from there. So that's the last game of the recap. Hope you enjoyed those 6 games. I'll be posting this to YouTube for you guys who missed it. And on Friday we'll be doing at least another 6 games. Like I said before, I'll do Neo and Daru Daru, TRX FTW and Mr. Pants, Todovsky, who's the Music Dan, against Higgs. I'll do Lamalure and GPAC, the top ladder spot match. Fiend Keto and Chessick Student. I'll do Up and Comer against Seek. So that'll be at Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, normal time. So until then, hope you guys learned something from these mistakes. Thanks for watching, and